Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 26, Defining Squirrelly. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. And welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're going to talk about the stories told in a most and least favorite episode of Stargate SG1 Season 8, Reckoning, Parts 1 and 2, and Icon. How you doing today, Mike?
Doing quite well, thanks. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. And what's new in your writing world?
What's new in my writing world? Let's see, I'm still working on the final round of edits for the first book in the Zara series. Other than that, I've been catching up on miscellaneous things, notes and emails I've had sitting for a while. Tried to knock some of that stuff out. Setting up my writing goals for August. Sending out a letter, sent that out. I created a temporary cover for Zara 2 so that I can set that up for pre-order when the first book comes out. And I've been doing just some website updates. There's some more information I wanted to get up there. Some cleaner imagery and fonts and things like that. How about you? What's going on in your writing world?
You know, it's been kind of a slow week for me. I've not really done very much at all. Just a lot of things sort of came up this week that I had to deal with, sort of just like stuff at home kinds of things. So I didn't get any audiobook chapters edited this week, which I'm disappointed in myself because I'd like to at least get one, and I might do one today if I have time. Didn't really get any writing done. So yeah, not much. Not much went on in the writing world this week, which, you know, it happens. How about interesting stories that you've come across? Have you seen anything in movies, TV, or read anything really cool in books?
There was a Kindle Vella story that was interesting. It's another horror story on there called Spider Sight. This girl has a pet spider that only she can see. Her parents think it's just this imaginary spider, and it starts killing people around her. So things go bad really fast. It's a weird story, but it's interesting and entertaining and horrific.
Okay, so it's sort of like taking, agoraphobia and the evil invisible friend thing and kind of mixing those two.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's if you're into horror type stories, it's you can check out. You can read the first 3 episodes for free because it's on Kindle Vella.
Well, so we'll put the link in the show notes if folks want to check that out. Now, is this one rated R?
Yes, this one is definitely rated R.
All right, so if you're interested in horror and you are old enough to make an informed decision on reading an R-rated story, we'll put that link in the show notes so you can find Spider Sight on Kindle Vella. Anything else that you've been come across this week?
I saw Oppenheimer.
Oh, what did you think?
Very interested in that story. I was really looking forward to seeing it. I'm not sure if I think it's a great story or not. Some of that comes down to just Christopher Nolan tends to sort of, drag things out sometimes. You see it?
I have not seen it. I think I need to be in the right place because I expect it to be pretty heavy.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, it's a pretty heavy theme. With the development of the nuclear bomb and all that. That's only part of the story, actually, because it's about him, obviously, and centered around that. but there's more about his life and sort of his role as a physicist and professor before that, and then after that, and the trials he goes through later, and how all that affects him. So yeah, it's definitely a heavy story. I think I was expecting more from it. But it's it's a good story. I just think it could have been an hour shorter, and it would have been fine. It was just so long. It's 3 hours long, so it takes a bit.
Okay.
But it definitely has an impact. I will say that.
It's good to know. Thank you.
How about you? What have you been reading or watching or listening to?
Well, we finished watching the season 3 of The Witcher, and I thought it was pretty good. I kind of can see where the story is going. I think the story is pulling all the threads together well. And so I thought it was mostly pretty good. There were a couple of episodes where I was like, "Oh, I'm not sure what's going on here, and I don't understand how this is connected to the story and what this is all about." But for the most part, I thought it was enjoyable. And then after we finished The Witcher, we started watching Good Omens season 2, which I got to tell you, after all the blood and gore and violence that is in The Witcher, the charmingness, is that a word? Charmingness of Good Omens is just really delightful.
Yeah, it's a very different tone to those two stories, huh?
Oh, yes, so much so. And then, of course, always keeping up with Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which has also continued to be fun. These are some really high-quality stories. They're not all 100% perfect, but they're still really good. There's not one that I would rate below a 7, I don't think.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I haven't seen any of those, so I'm looking forward to it. They're all on my list. Obviously, those are the kinds of things that I watch. So I'm excited to get into them. Though I played the Witcher game, so maybe I have some sense of what's coming, or I don't know how much they varied from that, how much the game varied from the books either. I don't know.
I did not read the books or play the games, so all I'm familiar with is the television series. And season 1 was confusing because they went back and forth in time frames and didn't tell you.
Yeah.
And you just sort of had to attach yourself to a character and hang on for the ride, so to speak. And if you weren't connected to a character, then it took me 3 times to finally get into it, watching the first couple of episodes multiple times before I finally got into it.
Yeah, I thought that was a pretty terrible decision on their part. Having played the game and knowing these characters, I was still completely lost half the time.
Yeah.
Part of it is because you have a couple characters who don't age over the time period, so they look the same.
Yes.
Like, I don't know what time period I'm in. It's just all they could have just put up some text on the screen saying, 50 years ago or whatever. It would have been a lot easier to follow.
Oftentimes, I think when that happens in a series, especially a series that's been converted from a book or other media, that they're counting on the knowledge of the audience, that they think the fans are going to come in and fill in the gaps. Well, for people like me, who I'm interested in it because it's fantasy, but I haven't had any of this background information, they need to be aware of that audience too, and sort of help that audience kind of follow along. And as a writer, that's something I try really hard to remember. Who is my audience? Where is my audience coming from? So that when I am writing, and more importantly, editing, I am looking at it through that audience's eyes, because I know what my world is, I know what my story is, and I may just function from that perspective and then miss the opportunity to explain to people who are coming to my world and my story completely fresh, an opportunity to kind of explain stuff so that they can keep up.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there are some genre conventions that you can rely on, right? If you're writing fantasy, you're writing sci-fi, people who are reading those books, at least, if they're adults, they probably have read a number of those already. So they can grasp certain concepts quickly and get into your story. Everybody knows what elves and dwarves are for the most part because of Tolkien. If you're going to vary them from that, then that's up to you to describe that and make sure that they're different. But certainly things that are unique to your story, you need to bring them up to speed on. My first book, Zara, right? It's set in the Arabian Nights world. And I try to make that clear with the cover and the blurb so you know kind of what you're getting into. And then I just kind of assume that you have, watched Aladdin or you have some familiarity with the world, so you know what genies are and things like that, without having to like go into them. I still try to drop little quick notes references just to like, oh, okay, this is referring to this type of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's sometimes it's a tricky line where you don't know what people are going to grab or if they're going to be confused on something. But yes, I think The Witcher show did that poorly, unfortunately, in the first season.
Yeah. But I thought the second season went really well. And I thought the third season was fine.
I agree. The second season, for me, the second season was more enjoyable just because I could follow it.
Yeah.
It didn't require unnecessary brain power to figure out what was going on.
Are you ready to talk about a most favorite and least favorite episode from Stargate SG1 Season 8?
I am. Let's do it.
All right, let's begin. So let's start with Stargate SG1 Season 8's most favorite episode and the story that's told in Reckoning Parts 1 and 2. And I'm going to go ahead and read the synopsis from the Stargate fandom wiki for both parts 1 and 2. The replicators arrive in the Milky Way and begin an all-out assault on the Goa'uld. After they are wiped out, they will turn to the human populations for resources. Dr. Daniel Jackson is captured by replicator Carter in order to get into his memories from while he was ascended. In the meantime, Teal'c and Bra'tac plan on getting the Jaffa free, once and for all, by taking the Holy Land on Dakara, one of Baal's strongholds. After successfully taking Dakara, Teal'c and Lieutenant Colonel Samantha Carter realize that the temple has a weapon that they can defeat the replicators. However, they have to work fast, as the replicators have discovered the temple and Baal's forces are on their way as well to destroy it. Meanwhile, the replicators attack Stargate Command. So what did you think about this episode?
All right, starting from the beginning, I think, once again, I thought there was a good opening. The writing team does a great job of catching your attention right off the bat, typically. Right in the opening segment, I think we see Sam, come onto the Goa'uld ship and kill. I believe it was you is his name, if that's right, if I remember right. One of the system lords. So it catches your attention right off the start, and if you're watching the show, it's not Sam. Okay, the replicators have come. They've got their agenda. They're doing something here, and then again, they do a great job at ramping up the threat and the stakes throughout this episode. I like the idea of Teal'c and Bra'tac finally risking it all to free the Jaffa. It seemed like that was so long in coming. And like we talked about before with the Lost City episode, a lot of things that have been lingering in the background are sort of coming together in this couple of episodes. So sort of a win it all or lose it all moment for the Jaffa. And I like that they that in here. Gives us another plot line to follow. As not only the Goa'uld are there, the replicators are coming. So you have multiple things going at the same time, which is a complaint we've had about other episodes where they just have one thing and you're kind of bored halfway through. So I think they did that really well. I like that Baal comes to Earth via hologram to try to make some deal. And Neil just tells him to stuff it, basically. Nope. Sorry, you're on your own, buddy. I thought that was great and very, true to character. And it's something I think as the viewer that you wanted to happen. Like, don't make a deal with these guys. Let's see how this plays out first. There are a lot of turns, not like twists or different directions that the story took throughout, which I thought were great. That Anubis was expecting their attack. I like that Daniel figured out that it wasn't Oma he was talking to. I like that they came up with a way to defeat the replicators and having that fail almost immediately. It's like, oh, okay, they got this solution. And nope, it worked one time. That's all you get. So every time it's like, okay, there's something new and more danger, more threat, more requirements for the characters to have to think. I really like that when they do that in stories. I like that Teal'c, had they free the Jaffa, but then that went awry, and there was something else going on there that they had to deal with. And then, the replicators coming to Earth was a terrifying thing. You kind of knew at some point it was going to be going there. So we get to finally see the beginnings of that. And then there's an interesting collision of the two plot lines with Teal'c and the rest of SG1, where the plot lines collided, where the weapon they needed to destroy the replicators was on the planet where the Jaffa were fighting for their survival or freedom. So I like that. I like how that came together. I love that there was a puzzle to get into the ancient temple. It wasn't just walk in and have easy access. So from a writing perspective, right, you're putting more and more challenges in front of the heroes. It just makes the episode so much more interesting. I think this is what's lacking on a lot of the episodes that are the least favorites. So there's not so much challenges as just we kind of go through the motions. So here it's like every step of the way there's something coming up. So I thought they did that really well. I loved how every side basically wanted to destroy this weapon. The replicators, the Goa'uld, the humans, everyone except for Anubis. He's like, I'll just wipe everything out. That was funny. I liked how Daniel sort of managed to use Replicarter against herself and at least give the SG team some time to figure things out. Yeah, there's so many things. I really like this episode. I thought, again, like The Lost City, it was a very satisfying culmination of all these different threads that have been going on in the background for so long. But I've talked enough. What about you? What did you like about this episode?
I have similar notes. Again, the opening is wild, and it tells you right away exactly what the stakes are going to be. And we lose Yu, who's been a consistent Goa'uld system lord, who's actually shown some sympathy for Earth, I think since season 1 or 2. So for 8 seasons, let's say, I'm guessing, because I don't actually remember which season he first appeared. But so let's say, 7 or 8 seasons, we've had this character recurring, and now Replicator Sam has destroyed him. And it's just like, it's shocking. Immediately raises the stakes like super high right out of the gate. I loved how it brought in all the peeps, all our favorite peeps, all our recurring characters. We had Braytak, we have Jacob, we have Oma, we have Thor, right? It's all of these recurring people are coming back because this is, galactic catastrophe time. And we also have all the bad guys. We have Goa'uld, we have Anubis, we have Baal, we have the Replicators. We've got, Replicator Sam clone. Like you said, there's so many threads that are woven here that need to be resolved, and they are resolved in a really satisfying way throughout. There's terrific humor. As you pointed out, Jack is haranguing Baal. There's a reason for this, and I think it's a really good character-based reason. There's an episode called Abyss where Jack is actually captured by Baal, and he's tortured over and over again to death, and then revived in the sarcophagus. And it's a good episode for Jack's character and his coming close to despair. And we actually get to see Daniel in his, ascended form appear to help support Jack while he's going through this terrible torture. So to have Jack then turn around when he's got the upper hand on Baal and really push Baal's buttons is part of that trauma that Baal put Jack through. Do you remember what you did to me? Yeah. You'll be dead and we'll be glad. The sort of continuity of that, what happened to that character, and bringing it into this episode. I also really like, you pointed out all the different things that the characters were doing. We have Jack defending Stargate Command and pushing off Baal. We have Teal'c trying to save the Jaffa by taking over Takara. We've got Daniel, who's fighting off Replicator Sam as she's trying to probe his mind for memories. And we've got Carter deciphering the riddle on the wall of the temple, as well as Carter and Jacob working to decipher and figure out how to make the machine destroy the replicators. You like it when the characters have to think. I like it when all the characters contribute to the success, and that's what happened here. Everybody did something that made this work.
Yeah, it was a combined group effort, right? That was great.
Yeah.
I had another thought. I mean, it's not really related to that. It's just related to this episode and the Lost City episode. So I saw recently an interview. They're talking about this, and we're saying the original plan was to bring SG1 to sort of a climax and then have the Lost City be a movie, like on this big screen, and then have another series, have a series of movies with SG1, and then spin off into Atlantis at that point. And when they pitched that idea, they said, well, what you're going to do instead is have both series going at the same time. So I think Lost City, to me, when I watched Lost City, it felt like this epic movie, kind of like the Avengers movies, right? Where they all come together and it's sort of this epic story. That's what the Lost City felt like. And it was so good. And I think it could have been a movie. And maybe that's why, because they had set up so much going toward that point. And this one felt the same way. I almost wonder if they hadn't planned another movie like this and kind of built the season up to this point, because it had that feel of like this epic feel of like, okay, everything's coming together. Here's where it's all going to go down. Anyway, it's sort of an aside. It had that same feel to me as Lost City. It's like, this could be a movie, epic feeling thing on this big screen.
I seem to recall, if anyone has any link to actual information as opposed to my potentially faulty memory, please feel free to put it in the comments wherever you're listening to this podcast. I seem to recall that the original plan was that this was going to be, like you just said, the last season. And so all of these episodes in season 8 were wrapping things up to then move over to Atlantis. And then you're right, they then said, okay, we're going to run them together, and had 2 more seasons of Stargate SG1 after they intended to shut it down. And so I think all of not just this episode, which may or may not have been written to be a movie, but all the episodes running up to the end of season 8 here were intended to wrap it up. Because we have other episodes after this that kind of have the same sort of feel.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Is there anything you didn't like from this episode?
A few things I think I would have tried to improve, perhaps. Starting off with a small thing, I think, I'm kind of jumping around these episodes. Like I said before, I haven't watched them all many years, so I might be missing some character development or something here. Just coming into this one, Anubis showing himself as this disease, like whatever ailment he had on his scars, whatever, all over his body, revealing himself that way seemed to be against the characterization of the Goa'uld as vain entities and concerned about their appearance and how they're perceived. I just don't think one of them would show themselves like that, especially since we saw them before having like full robes and mask and cape and all that stuff. But it's possible something happened in between that I don't remember. Again, that's a really small thing anyway.
You're right. There is something that happened in between.
Okay.
So Anubis and his robes and stuff were to cover the fact that he's actually half ascended. I think you know that.
Yeah.
So he's somewhere between the mortal plane and the ascended plane. And so that was supposed to show his half ascended sort of nature. And then when Anubis's fleet is destroyed in Lost City, he loses that physical form. He has to, from that point forward, steal bodies to live in. But he is so parasitical that his presence destroys the bodies over a period of time.
Yeah, I missed that part.
Yeah, we learned that in an episode called Lockdown, which is, not too long after O'Neill is named the general, in command of the SGC.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. I figured there was this case because I think in this one he takes over another body at some point, right?
But I think it's really interesting to point out, because I hadn't thought of this before, the way you point out that most of the Goa'uld are very vain and pick beautiful bodies and take care of themselves and present themselves so beautifully, and Anubis doesn't care. And that kind of ramps up his evil, I think, in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess that's what caught me. It's like there's a personality difference here, right? Like he doesn't care anymore, or it was to show us, the viewer, what he's going through. Him not caring, I think, makes more sense. And again, if we see evidence of that in a previous episode, I think that makes more sense. Otherwise, if it's just to show the viewer, I think it would be better to show him masked to other people, and then when he's alone, see him like this to reinforce that okay, he doesn't want to see people to see him like this. Anyway, it's all a small thing in the context of this episode. I thought the weapon that was capable of destroying on the replicators being on the Jaffa planet, Dakar, whatever it was. That was almost absurdly convenient. Like, oh, look, it just happens to be right where they are. I like the fact that it came together, but it just seemed unbelievable, really. It just happens to be on the same planet they went to versus they're going to that planet because of, for two reasons. Because it has this weapon and because that, like if they had set it up that way, I think I could have bought it a little bit more. I thought the puzzle for getting into the ancient temple seemed remarkably simplistic for such an ancient, knowledgeable, advanced civilization. It seemed like something from a video game. I loved the fact that it was there, but it seemed a little bit silly. Those are the kind of things I love writing in my stories. Like Zara, the whole Zara series is going to have like puzzles and stuff like that. So I can't complain about that too much. I think the replicators invaded Earth too early. Because once they did that, it seemed obvious and predictable that the weapon was just going to destroy them, which was fine. I think they could have delayed that invasion just a little bit later in the episode. So it's like, you almost don't have time to think about it. It's like, they're there and, oh no, everything's bad. And, just shortly later, they finally get the weapon going and it takes them out. Which time I'm like, okay, this is just going to be resolved. Otherwise, the show's over. Replicants take over. That's it. And then I had a couple questions at the end. Maybe I just missed these things, what happened here. I wasn't sure how Thor survived. So I thought the last we saw him, he was beaming Sam off the ship because the replicators were taking over his ship. And as far as I know, they didn't have a good way of dealing with him at that point. But maybe I missed something.
Sam did say that he would be in touch after his consciousness was downloaded into a new body. So it sounds like he downloaded his consciousness and transmitted it as his body was destroyed by the replicators. That's just a guess. But you're absolutely right. It doesn't explain how he got his consciousness away.
Yeah, she said that toward the end of the episode, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like much later than when we last saw her, I think. Yeah, I wasn't sure if like that was their explanation for it. Like, okay, you just beamed to another ship or what, but you're probably right. It's probably what they were saying. And then the other question left at the end, what happened to Anubis?
Yes.
I don't think they addressed that. I'm guessing that's a thread left open for future.
Actually, the next episode covers it, and it's really good. Okay. So if you have time, watch it because it's a fun episode.
Okay, cool. All right, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, other than that, there's mostly small things again. How about you? What would you improve?
Again, small things. I thought that the first couple of scenes were a little bit exposition heavy. I felt, one of the things in Lost City that I thought was so brilliant in that episode was there was a lot of explanation of what was going on in very sort of organic, natural conversation. Whereas this one, it felt a little bit more exposition heavy. We know we're just observers here, and we know that you have coordinated with all the other ships in the galaxy to fight Amaterasu. It wasn't as natural and flowing as we saw in Lost City to give us all the explanation of what was going on. Small thing, very small thing. There was a heavy use of one of my least favorite phrases, once and for all. It's overused in a lot of places, and so once I start noticing that, it bugs me every time I hear it.
I think I remember there was some line where it said, I think it was Jack who said something like, destroy them forever once and for all, or something like, it was like this redundant, not only did they say that, but it was redundant within that sentence.
And then there was just sort of just a thing that it's not a writing issue really, except that maybe it is, or maybe it's a special effects issue. But when they're shooting bugs that are walking across the control panel that controls the Stargate, wouldn't that damage the equipment? Guns are powerful, especially at that range. Wouldn't it damage the computer keyboard or break the glass? I don't know. It just because they have to make it work, they shoot them and then these things fall apart, but there doesn't seem to be any damage to the equipment. I'm nitpicking now.
Yeah, I was assuming that the stuff was getting damaged, and they're like, well,
maybe it is.
Get destroyed anyway.
I think I'm down to the littlest, tiniest little nit to pick, so I'm going to let it go. What rating would you give this episode?
I think I would give it a 9. I enjoyed this pair of episodes a lot. Put it up there. I just below The Lost City, probably.
And I'd give it an 8.5 because it is a really good, exciting episode that escalates the stakes throughout, keeps us engaged, keeps us watching, and has a very satisfying ending.
Agreed.
Let's next look at the story told in a least favorite episode of Stargate SG1 Season 8, Icon. And I will read the synopsis from the Stargate Fandom Wiki. Dr. Daniel Jackson is declared MIA after he was in the middle of a world war on Tagalas, which the rebels have won. Jackson cannot reach home, as the rebels have taken control of the planet's Stargate, and he must rely on a small band of soldiers, led by Jared Kane, from the planet's military, to take back the city and defeat the rebel leader Soren, if Jackson is to have any chance of getting back to Earth. So what did you like about this episode, Mike?
I won't have as much to say about this one as Reckoning. Obviously, it's one episode instead of two. But it's more of a one-off episode, so it doesn't have as much going on. You could kind of plug this from the Stargate timeline, and it's not going to affect the larger story a whole lot. But still, I thought it had a cool start with the people showing off their Stargate as this, relic, and then it activates. That I thought that was really clever. It's one of those things that I like about sci-fi, where it gets me to think, what if I was those people in that position? Like, that would just blow your mind, right? What happens there. So I really like that start and the setup for the show. I like how they set up this conflict between different factions on the planet, and there's this holdover group of religious people who sort of revere the gate and the gods that they perceive to come before. Obviously, this is all much like on Earth, going back to the days when the Goa'uld were there and ruling them. So there's some leftover residual belief and mythology there, much like, if the Stargate was here and you had the Egyptian gods. But the rest of the people have moved on and forgotten about it. But there's a group that says, no, this is real. So they're latched onto it. So I like that setup, how that still affects them. And you have a group that still holds to the past beliefs. I really enjoyed how there were some serious consequences to SG1 going to this planet. Basically, the planet was destroyed because they went there. I mean, I suppose it's possible that could have happened anyway, but they set afire the fuse, if you will, by their actions. Just being there triggered the series of events that caused many of the major cities to be destroyed by the various groups. I thought that was, I wouldn't say it was a nice touch, but it was good to show significant consequences of going out there and exploring other worlds, and sort of what happens when you don't have something like the Prime Directive in Star Trek, right? It's like, yeah, this is what could happen. And they didn't even do anything. They just showed up. So I think it was good to see that. Because I always wondered that in Stargate, it's like you're just going to some of these places that have primitive civilizations, and it seems like to have very little effect, where this is the possibility on the other side of how far it could go. So I like that. I like how they sort of reveal the mystery of what happened to the viewer by cutting between 2 points in time. You get, sort of the flashbacks of Daniel Jackson. So I thought that was a good idea. Yeah, there's a core of something here that I think was interesting. Those are the things that stood out to me in this episode. So let me throw it back at you. What did you like about this episode?
I agree that the premise was really interesting and very realistic, and I'm surprised that they haven't tackled this before like this. What happens when you show up, and your showing up completely undermines a culture, a society, and a culture. I mean, they've kind of hinted at this in a couple of episodes, but this really dug deep. And I thought it was brilliant. a great story and a great idea. And that's all I liked about it.
All right. Like we have some thoughts on this for the other side of this equation. All right. So there's definitely things I think could be improved. I liked the flashbacks. I do feel like they detracted from the momentum of the present day story. Like I wanted to okay, here's where we're at. Here's the situation. Let's get going. And they flash back to they're just like hanging out talking on, what's going on, what happened. And like, that's just, there's some interesting things there. I think that could have been handled better. The course of other actions that were taking place presently. Maybe Daniel's slowly remembering, oh, this is what happened, as they're trying to do something. I felt like the plot line with Daniel started to drag pretty quickly. It kind of stalled out for me in the middle. I feel like they could have improved that by maybe amping up the distrust between, I'm forgetting the names now, the wife's husband and Daniel, so that the other guy just basically refused to do anything, which forced Daniel to try to convince his other men, his other soldiers, to do the attack against his wishes. Something like that, to give that plot line a little bit more conflict and a little bit more for Daniel to try to solve. I thought, that middle part with him just was too soft, too weak. And then something else that we've talked about before, outside of the initial setup, which I thought was really cool, there was no sci-fi in this story. It felt like a couple of the other episodes we talked about as our least favorites, where they go to this other planet and there's humans there and earlier form of civilization, and we're just dealing with their thing. I think that could have been more interesting if the planet had something, could have been of use to Earth, some resource or some technology, something left over by the Goa'uld they could learn from, would have increased the stakes for the Stargate command team. As it was, it just felt like, I don't know, like a side episode from a different type of show, almost. They could have made it work. They needed a few little tweaks. How about you? What did you see that could be improved?
I respectfully disagree with you. I think the flashbacks were a real problem. And I am going to agree with you that the flashbacks, they took away from the tension, the rising tension and the rising concern about what was happening in this episode, and changed the tone over and over again. You'd get, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And then, oh, now he's lying in bed and being ministered to and, getting things on his face. It was just too, I never got a chance to get invested in the characters, in the story, because it kept going back and forth. And I think that had this story been told in a non-flashback way from the beginning, this episode opened with Jackson's eyes being uncovered and, oh, you've been injured and, oh, what's going on? He doesn't know what's going on. And it's supposed to trigger my curiosity, but it doesn't really, because I'm sort of like, okay, he's been wounded and he's in some kind of farmhouse, but I don't have enough to work on it. And he needs to maybe ask, where's the rest of my team? But he doesn't even ask that. So I don't have enough to get me engaged. Well, I don't know. Or, they disappeared. Or what's Daniel's goal going to be? Is it going to be to find his team? Something to tell me what the story's going to be about, instead of just Daniel's going to recover. Which is boring. That's kind of how I felt with that opening scene. If they had done that opening scene of, like you just said, the people at the museum looking at the exhibit, and then all of a sudden the exhibit comes to life, and then moved on from there, I think that would have been a really exciting story where every step of the way, something goes wrong. And the political missteps are huger and huger and huger until it ends up in war. And then they get separated and Jackson gets stuck there and they make it through the Stargate or something. And now it's trying to get Jackson out of there and try to stop the war. I think that could have been a really fascinating episode. I think we see Daniel going back to Stargate Command, and then Jack says to him, you have to come back as soon as things get squirrely. And then Jackson doesn't. And I think I would have liked to have seen at that moment that Jackson actually making a decision to stay. Because characters sometimes get into trouble in stories, and then they have to get themselves out of trouble. But what happened in this episode were just things happening to Daniel. Not that he actually made decisions that caused these things to happen. things got squirrely pretty early on. And he should have said, okay, I got to go now. Or he should have said, I know I was supposed to leave, but I think I can help these people. Something along those lines that you see him analyzing what's the definition of squirrely and then making a decision, even if it's against Jack, which we know he does. So we're okay with that because he does what he thinks is right. But we didn't see that. It was just stuff happening to him. And so that was less enjoyable. I also felt like the scenes with Soren on Earth felt very unrealistic. This character is paranoid. And he is so firmly in his beliefs that his beliefs are, that he's blinded to anything else. He has no reason to go to Earth. He doesn't care what they think. He doesn't need what they have, except for weapons, which he should know that they're not going to give him. It seemed unrealistic to me that this character would go to Earth and risk being captured or risk being even killed. It didn't make any sense to me, his being there and them keeping him there and talking to him. It seemed like it was only there for some exposition on how bad he was. Which we pretty much already knew. So we didn't need it. I also felt that the romance, the love thing, was out of place. Their world is falling to pieces. They had a war. Troops are going to come and find them and, kill you on sight because you don't believe the way the true believers believe. And you're going to get involved in a romance? It didn't make sense. There didn't seem to be enough time with this couple together, with enough interaction with this couple together. It seemed superimposed and unrealistic to me. Now, if this had started at the beginning and, we had that mid episode twist where they get separated and Daniel's injured and everybody else escapes through the Stargate, and then saw the progression of the relationship and him trying to get back and him getting into having the conflict with her husband, that might have made more sense. It might have worked a little bit, but it still felt, again, sort of superimposed on top. I think I would have done it from the very beginning and not done it with flashbacks. I think that would have allowed the tension and the tone to escalate in a way that would bring the viewer along with the story.
Yeah, that's a fantastic note. I think you're right. Would have also could have taken that to put more of a focus on them being, a cause of almost their societal collapse, right?
Yeah.
They could have stuck with that and made it something that was more of a result of their actions rather than just showing up. I like your comment about the squirrely, when it gets squirrely, get out of there. Right, that was a perfect setup. Have them go over there, and then Daniel could have proactively chosen to stay and get involved. Maybe could have led to horrible moral decision, which they've had situations like that before in this show. It's like, ooh, that's a tough call to make right there. This one didn't have any of that, and it could have. I mean, it could have been a prime directive moment. We get involved and help these people out who are all obviously on the right side, or do we let their society play out as it is and they decide to get involved and it ends up becoming even worse? That could have been a much, much more interesting story. I mean, I agree with you. And they have Soren come through the gate, right? And he's talking to them. I thought was, okay, I mean, the guy basically just surrendered to you. Like, what's the problem? Just take this guy hostage. Like, situation is over. Like, come on, it doesn't make any sense. You could stop this whole war right now, and you're just like, we can let him go back to his planet. Why not? That was silly. And I also agree about the romance being out of place. I wanted to cling on to something there, but there was no setup for it. First of all, and like you said, they're in apocalypse mode, post-apocalypse. They're in survival mode. It's not, let's make a homestead mode. Yeah, that was really weird too. I agree. Yeah, it's a shame. I think they had a couple good setups here and took a path that, maybe wasn't the best.
So what rating would you give this one?
I'd say like a 4 or 5 at the most. Started off interesting. Not necessarily with Daniel waking up, like you said. I think it would have been better just having the gate. It lost me a lot in the middle, and then it at least got interesting again somewhat at the end. wouldn't go out of my way to watch it again, but if I had forgotten what it was about, I might watch it again. How about you?
Same. I give this a 4. I would watch this over One False Step and The Light. And we thank you for joining us as we talked about the stories told in a most and least favorite episode from Stargate SG1 Season 8. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters. We are so grateful for your support and encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on YouTube and Spotify, and now available on Amazon Podcasts and coming soon to Google Podcasts and Apple Podcasts. No matter where you listen, we thank you for liking and subscribing or following or thumbs upping. Yep, that's a word. Depending on where you're listening, it may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and on YouTube at Michael Grayford and E.W. Barnes at a1000years.com, as well as on YouTube at e.w.barnes-author. And those links will be in the show notes wherever you're listening. Join us next time as we look at the stories told in a most and least favorite episode of Stargate SG1 Season 9, Ripple Effect and Collateral Damage. Thank you so much, Mike. This was fun.
Yes, thank you. Always nice to talk good stories with you.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.